Alright, so we're going to be talking about Bakugo in this one and how powerful he is. Let me just put it out there that he's pretty powerful. Like, he's not exactly on the pro level, I would say, but he's definitely at the top of UA. Like, already, despite only being a first year, I would say that he's already above most of the first, second, and even third years that we've seen so far. Now, we haven't seen too much of the second and third years outside of like some people in the provisional license exam and the big three, of course. And we saw how Bakugo did against a second year in Shishikura from Shiketsu, and he had kind of mixed results against him, which shows that he's not exactly at the elite level. But he has come, obviously, a very far way since the provisional license exam. And we'll get into how far he has come towards the end of the video when I go into spoiler stuff. But for now, I'm just going to stay in non-spoilery territory because I don't really need to go into spoiler stuff to establish how powerful he is overall. So a lot of what makes Bakugo so powerful is honestly just his genetics. Like, it's implied multiple times throughout the series that like he's in the top 0.1% of like genetic freaks. Like, he just has athleticism at the highest degree. You can kind of compare him to like the top NFL and NBA players. Like, they obviously just have a greater inherent potential for excellence than most of the population. And we see that from Bakugo throughout the series. Like, he's clearly a cut above the rest of all of the students in Class 1A, which are already the best of the best, at least in the students' quirks area. And besides just being blessed with athletic genetics and superior fight IQ, which has even had him labeled as a genius sometimes, he was also blessed with an overpowered quirk. So let's just explain that, just in case you're unaware of what it is. So it's called Explosion, and it's pretty self-explanatory. His quirk allows him to create said explosions, and he's able to do this because he's able to secrete nitroglycerin sweat from his palms. And of course, the more that he secretes, the bigger explosions that he can create. Now, this also goes into his genetics because he got this quirk from a combination of both of his parents' quirks passing it down to him. Like, his dad had an oxidizing sweat quirk and his mom had a glycerin quirk, so you combine them, you get Bakugo's explosion quirk. And basically, his whole entire fighting style is based around this quirk, which means that he has, extreme control over it, almost to like a mastery's degree. And this style is extremely aggressive and constantly uses pressure on his opponent. And using his quirk like mini propulsions allows him to be super mobile and versatile at the same time. And adds into just basically the fight IQ that we were talking about, because it makes him super adaptable in the fight and basically makes his opponent fight his fight. Like, he doesn't really come in with a game plan. He just goes at them full force and then makes his opponent adapt to them. And then on the fly, he can adapt to them adapting to him. It just makes him all the much more formidable. And that brings us to Bakugo's speed. So using his quirk in tandem with his agility, he is very fast. But I wouldn't say inherently he is exceptionally fast. I mean, he's not even the fastest in Class 1A. And this issue, or minor issue, is addressed later on in the series, and we'll talk about that when we go into the spoilery stuff. But for now, I mean, he really makes up for it with his overall reflexes, because they're, I think, would probably be considered at superhuman levels. I mean, he's fast enough to easily overcome Kurogiri. He's fast enough to keep up with Todoroki's ice. I mean, he could just easily defend it. And it's already been established that Todoroki is exceptionally fast in the reflexes department himself. Like, he's another genetic freak like Bakugo. And then, of course, probably his most defining reflex feat is keeping up with Izuku using 5 to 8% of full cali, where Izuku is obviously moving at superhuman levels of speed, and Bakugo is not that fast, but his reflexes more than make up for the difference. And even at some points in that fight, he's getting the better of Izuku in the reflexes department. So now let's just go more into his explosion quirk and the versatility of it, because he's really utilitarian when it comes to the usage of this thing. So outside of the mobility aspect that we talked about with this, he can also use it in like a flight manner. I mean, he's not exactly flying as if he had wings or something, but he could just keep perpetually moving through the air, kind of just using short bursts and kind of acting like a turbine with his explosion, like glide through the air with this. And if he really wants to, he can like blast himself into the air like a missile if he just uses like his full power blast at the ground, like moving at extreme speeds with this thing. But aside from that, the damage that his explosions are capable of producing is pretty significant. Like, almost everyone has trouble dealing with this outside of like if you're All Might or something. But he's basically really holding back most of the time too, because obviously it's an explosion and his quirk can very easily kill, and most of his opponents that we've seen so far in the series have been like fellow students or something. So we don't really see him at full power most of the time, but just like even using this thing at, I would say, base level power, I mean, he could take care of Kurogiri, he can just brute force over Kirishima's hardening quirk, as well as just blast through Todoroki's ice wall, which was something that almost everyone had difficulty dealing with. And like the block level perspective that we get of the explosions when he's fighting against Izuku are pretty devastating just to the block and the buildings around him. So yeah, he can really do serious damage just at base level with these things, but he can even go further because, like, if he uses both of his hands together in kind of like a Kamehameha stance, he can make, like, basically like a fiery Kamehameha thing, and this is super powerful, something that he only really used against All Might because obviously he's, like, the only one that can really sustain something like that. But going further, he can also use, like, a cannon in his gauntlet. Like, if he just builds up all of his sweat, he can just release it all in, like, one massive explosion. And this thing is so powerful that we don't really see him use it that much because it is so powerful, and it can very easily kill. Like, just the end result of the first time we see it is pretty devastating. He can also concentrate his explosion into a single point and create, like, a beam with it, which he calls the AP shot, which is strong enough to just easily go through concrete. He can also alternate this move and make it like a scattered shot if he's trying to hit multiple targets at once. He can also do like a mini solar flare attack, which he calls the stun grenade, which basically like stuns his opponent by generating like a huge flash of light if need be. And that brings us to what I suppose is his strongest move, which we don't really see too much because, again, of how powerful it is and how easily it can kill, and that is the howitzer impact. So he uses the explosion coming out of both of his hands in like alternating directions to spin himself super fast, and it creates like a mini tornado around him, and this creates like a vortex of oxygen, I guess. And as he's coming closer to his target, then he activates like a full powered explosion, and that combines with the vortex that he created, and it just creates this massive explosion, and it looks awesome at that too. So aside from using his quirk, Bakugo's still pretty physically powerful. Like, I'd probably say more physically powerful than most students in UA who don't have strength augmenting quirks. And we don't really see this too much, but a great example of it is in his rematch against Izuku, when like mid-momentum he hits Izuku like in the solar plexus and sends him flying like multiple feet into a guardrail, which winds up denting it. So like, yeah, that's maybe even superhuman levels of feat even for the My Hero world. And yes, it was mid-momentum, but still obviously very impressive for a student to be able to pull off a feat like this. And that also goes back to the top tier genetics that we were talking about, and that also plays a fact into what we're going to get into now, and that's his durability. Because he has surprisingly high levels of durability and endurance as well, because the best example of this is when All Might beats the crap out of them in their final exam. Like, of course, All Might is holding back, because if he wasn't, then he'd, like, vaporize Bakugo. But, yeah, he's holding back, and he still has, like, the power restraining weights on him. But still, he gives a pretty good beating to Bakugo. Like, he's hitting him so hard in the stomach here that he winds up coughing up, like, a liter of milk. And then he knees him so hard in the face that he sends up, like, crazy fast into the building behind him, and this is like a massive explosion. This is like serious damage that he's taking here. This would be serious damage for almost anyone that's not like a pro hero, maybe even more so a pro hero that's not in the top 10, and Bakugo just comes out of this immediately, showing that, yeah, he's pretty formidable in this aspect, and this happens like numerous times to him in this final exam. Another good example of Bakugo's durability is when he gets hit by Izuku using 5%, not only once, but twice. But the first time he's kind of caught off guard, but the second time, he not only takes a 5% punch, but kind of like brute forces through it and then overcomes Izuku, and further shows us how powerful his explosion is when he's kind of not holding back as much. And then, of course, winds up defeating Izuku fair and square, just further showing how formidable he really is. So that's pretty much Bakugo from a combat aspect. Very powerful, one of the strongest students in all of UA, and very close to being at the pro level, at least in my opinion. But now I want to go further which means that we're going to be going into manga spoilers. And this is like Season 5 and Season 6 stuff. So if you don't want to know what's going to happen, I suggest you check out now. So in the joint training arc in Bakugo's 4th round battle against Class 1B, we see another named move from him that he uses against Kamakiri called the X Catapult, where he's like throwing Kamakiri full force, aided by the propulsion of his explosion. And we've actually kind of seen this before, because when he's throwing the distance ball, he uses the same fundamentals in that sequence, and also when he's throwing Izuku to the finish line in his exam against All Might, the same fundamental is being used there. He just didn't really call it the X Catapult at that point, but you know, further showing the versatility of his quirk. Now let's go into the improvements that Bakugo has made, and this brings us back to what we were talking about earlier with his speed. So when he's training with Endeavor, Endeavor acknowledges that Bakugo has a very high level of mobility and agility, but he's kind of lacking in the overall speed department. Like, he needs to have a faster method of travel. And he also winds up taking the advice of Todoroki, who says to try to emulate Endeavor's method of travel, because he concentrates his flames into like one concentrated burst and uses that like as a propulsion system, kind of like a jet engine or like a missile, if you will. And Izuku says you can kind of use it like he does his AP shot, concentrating his explosion into one single point. But instead of using it as an offensive beam weapon, he can use it as a propulsion system. And Bakugo actually winds up doing this, because we see when he's going to save Natsuo, he actually does that bursting out of the car, and we can see it very clearly in this frame. And it actually makes him, at least in this one sequence, faster than Izuku and Todoroki. And most recently, we've actually seen that this has probably really helped him in his overall mobility as well, because he somewhat seemed to have improved, because he takes out all of those training robots effortlessly, and not just using like mass spread explosions like he typically does. He says that they're all pinpoint blasts now, and he does it extremely fast, like almost instantaneously. So this is just further showing us how much Bakugo has improved just from the weeks that he's been training with Endeavor alone. But that's pretty much all we've seen from Bakugo now. We haven't seen the full extent of how far he has come, but we eventually will, and I will definitely make an update video once we see everything that he's capable of. But until then, that's pretty much it for this video. So let me know what you think about Bakugo. How powerful do you think he is, and how far do you think he's come? And also, if you like the video, guys, please give it a like. I also have a Patreon, gives you access to a weekly Q&A, and if you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.